We turn now to Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips. He was one of the few Democrats to run against President Biden in the primary. Good to have you here.
Great to be with you.
So when you suspended your race in March, you endorsed President Biden. Do you stand by that? And what are you telling your delegates to do at this point?
I do stand by it. I mean, obviously, Margaret, I ran because I saw a delusion. I saw a country that was in a very different place than our Democratic Party. Over 50% of Democrats at that time wanted a different candidate. And I was on a mission to expose the truth, provide an alternative, and do what I really saw in the numbers and through intuition was necessary. It didn't work out, of course, but I was trying to create the conversation that I knew was a matter of when, not if. And now we're having it. The president did call me in March, a very gracious conversation, and I did endorse him, and I still endorse him. But it is time to step aside and turn this over to a new generation. My endorsement stays until he makes that decision. I'm encouraging that. The country's encouraging it, and he has a chance to be an American hero.
He says he has made a decision. It just seems to be not the decision many lawmakers would like.
It's the wrong decision.
40-odd.
Look, leaving a career in public service is not easy. When I ran for president, I knew I'd be giving up my career in Congress, a career that I absolutely love. But there's something more important. Joe Biden has had an extraordinary career. I can't come close to what he has done. But it is hard to leave this, and I recognize that. But he has to. He's got to put this country first. By the way, I want to send a message of optimism to Democrats right now. This could be the most extraordinary opportunity that we've had in generations to reset, re-energize, recommit, and actually not just change the narrative, which would really make Donald Trump upset, but to succeed. And I know the president recognizes that. I hope he concludes that quite soon.
So we have, 40-odd lawmakers who have now spoken out. There's over 200 House Democrats. So where's the majority at this point? Because a relative small number are actually going on record as you are right now.
Well, it started with one, me. Now we're at about 40. But the truth is,
he have the
we have a culture of silence.
Congress?
No, he does not. And in fact, I just wrote an op-ed that appears in the Wall Street Journal today that calls for a vote of confidence amongst my colleagues. A secret ballot, because so many are afraid that if they speak the truth, they're going to be punished, which is what happens in this business. It's repulsive. A secret ballot expeditiously, when we're back here this week, to present privately to the president to show him where Congress stands, I think would be helpful, because he is either ignoring the truth or those around him have failed to perform their national duty, which is to share the truth with him.
We have to take a break, but please stay with us. We want to continue that conversation on the other side of it.
Sure.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. We return to our conversation now with Minnesota Democratic Congressman Dean Phillips. Congressman, you were just saying that in your estimation, the president no longer has the faith and trust of the majority of Congress. Before your election, it was Republicans who held Minnesota's 3rd district for 60 years. You're not running for re-election there. With the scenario you are painting, do you think that Congress goes to Republican control? That's that seat, but also Congress in the Senate and the House?
I think so. And in fact, I think that's one reason we're seeing this massive shift right now is it's in my colleagues' backyard. They're seeing their numbers precipitously decline, our frontliners, the most important districts in the country. And to your point, I won a district that had not voted for a Democrat in 60 years. There are some of us that know how we can re-invite independents, never Trump Republicans. Democrats have been using imposition, not invitation. And I think my colleagues are recognizing that, sadly, a man we love, Joe Biden, is going to drag down this whole ticket. It's not just about the White House. And if Democrats do not hold the Senate or take back the House, I think it's real problematic for this country and for the future. And the answer is absolutely. And that is a pervasive sentiment, and it's real.
When you were considering your primary bid, you have shared, you made appeals to Michigan's Governor Gretchen Whitmer and also Illinois' Governor J.B. Pritzker. You were trying to urge them to run. They chose not to. Then you jumped in. Would you consider them or advocate for them at the top of the ticket now?
Darn right. What I want to see, Margaret, is the president pass the torch, term that everybody's using now, and then have a mini primary. This is exactly what I called for a year ago. It's not too late. Is it perfect timing? No, not at all. We have 3 weeks. We could have 4 town halls, in each geography in this country, invite the best and brightest Democrats, including those, Governor Beshear, I think Joe Manchin, of course, Vice President Harris, introduce themselves to the country, create energy, excitement in delegates, have the delegates at these town halls, the people, the 3,000 or so people, 4,000, who will be making the decision in Chicago this August. You know, this notion that that could be disastrous if we went to some kind of a brokered convention or we had a competition, the disaster is here now. The question is, do Democrats want to win? If so, the names you just mentioned, many others. Let's have a thoughtful, spirited competition, show great contrast with a Republican felon of the past and a dynamic Democrat for the future. It's not too late.
What is the cost of coming out against Joe Biden? You've paid a cost.
Yeah, my career is done in Congress. So be it, a small price to pay for the country. Colleagues who have come out have received some veiled, some implicit and explicit threats relative to their campaigns. This industry,
From who?
I'm not going to get into the who's, but this political industrial complex, this duopoly, is a big part of our national problem. We need competition. Both parties stifle it. Both parties suppress it. It's not a false equivalency. I'm not talking about values and principles, but that is the truth. We need competition. We should be promoting next generations, not diminishing them. I understand why so many need to be silent because their careers will come to a close. We got to start rewarding courage and punishing cowardice.
Congressman Phillips, thank you for sharing
Thank you, Margaret.
your point of view with us. We'll be right back. We turn now to the co-chairman of the Biden-Harris re-election campaign, Cedric Richmond, and he joins us this morning from New Orleans. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
So, Congressman, we heard, as you know, before you, from two allies of Joe Biden who have now changed their position. And we now look at the tally of roughly 40 lawmakers who have called for Joe Biden to step aside. Clearly, leadership is setting up a permission structure for lawmakers to come out and say these things. Has Joe Biden lost control of the Democratic Party?
No, he's not. And he's heard those concerns. And I want to be crystal clear. He's made a decision. And that decision is to accept the nomination and run for re-election, win re-election. And I think that there are those out there that need to hear it again, that he made a decision. He's going to be the candidate. He's going to be the next president. And now it's time to focus on the threat that Donald Trump poses and what the extreme agenda is on the other side.
Is the president aware that the calls are only growing in number and not diminishing?
The president's aware of the calls, and the president has made clear that members should do what they think they need to do. And he's going to do what the American people need him to do, and that's to beat Donald Trump, focus again on working families, protecting women's reproductive rights, building the economy from the bottom up and the middle out. All of those things are what's on Joe Biden's mind. And every moment that we continue to talk about a decision that has already been made means that's a moment we're not talking about Project 2025 or a former president who's trying to divide the country.
Do you think that that Leader Jeffries, former Speaker Pelosi, and Leader Schumer could stop these conversations if they wanted?
No, I was a member of the House. Members of the House are going to say and do whatever they want to do, and
That's a pretty big thing to come out against their own president.
And the president has a right to run for re-election. 14 million people voted for him. 80 million people voted for him in the last election. And look, you just had Dean Phillips on who ran against him. The president beat Dean Phillips in Dean Phillips' own district. The voters in Congressman Dean's district wanted the president to be the nominee. And he is the nominee, and he's going to be the next president of the United States.
So in our CBS polling, Donald Trump has a 5-point advantage on Joe Biden at this point in the race. And in a hypothetical head-to-head, Trump has a 3-point advantage over Vice President Kamala Harris. If she is running on the same platform of achievements as Biden, if the president says she is just as qualified, are you confident that she could move to the top of the ticket and beat Donald Trump?
What I'm confident in is that the Biden-Harris team ticket can beat Donald Trump, and that America needs them to beat Donald Trump. And if you look at the voters that are coalescing around President Biden and Vice President Harris, It's the people with the most on the line. We're talking about our working families. We're talking about women whose reproductive rights were taken away. We're talking about minority voters, where the Supreme Court's attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all of those things. And those are the voters that are rallying around the president and want him to continue to fight, which he said he's going to do.
So our CBS polling team asked voters if they think Joe Biden should step aside and give another candidate a chance to run. A sizable 4 in 10 black voters and about the same number of Democrats writ large think Biden ought to step aside as nominee. What do you make of those numbers?
Well, that's the question you asked. But did you ask those voters, are they voting for Biden? Did you ask them if they want someone who's going to stand up and fight for their rights, someone who's going to stand up and protect their freedom, someone who's going to unite the country, someone who's going to make sure that America is respected on the world stage? And so, look, we never thought this would be an easy race. And anyone who thought this was going to be an easy race was delusional. So we're preparing a campaign that can win in November. So that's thousands of paid canvassers. That's hundreds of offices open to talk to voters. And we're going to go out there, do the hard work to run this race. This is not a time for a sunshine patriot or a summer soldier. This is hard work, and we're going to do it.
But you were just talking about how members of your own party are continuing to come out against the party's nominee. This is the dominant conversation right now, not all the messages that you would like to have front and center issue-wise. How much time do you have here before it really starts hurting Joe Biden, that fellow Democrats are denigrating him? When do you think he can actually persuade his party?
The president's going to run his campaign. He's not trying to persuade his party. He's trying to persuade the voters that he will wake up every day fighting for them, and that the guy on the other side who's unhinged and who only thinks about himself is going to continue to divide this country and sell out working class and working families to the billionaire class. And so while my former colleagues and elected officials will continue to ponder and continue to talk, we're going to continue to talk about the issues in this race. And my advice to our elected members is to go out there and talk to your voters about what's at stake in this election. We've heard your concerns. The president believes he is the best person to beat Donald Trump. I agree with him. And by the way, Donald Trump has run in 3 Republican primaries and beat dozens of candidates. Nobody beat him. Mm-hmm. He won the presidency, and Joe Biden is the only person in the history of the United States to beat Donald Trump. And he's the best positioned to do it again. And so much is at stake. We should really focus on what's at stake, the character of the two people, the record accomplishments of this past administration. And we should go knock doors, and we should go tell it on a mountain that this race is important and Joe Biden is the person to beat Donald Trump.
I know you were with Joe Biden on Tuesday when he was speaking to NAACP. Have you spoken to him since? How is he feeling mentally right now about this?
The president's feeling good. Look, Joe Biden is a guy who's been knocked down many times in his life, and I mean serious knockdowns, but he never stays down. He wakes up because it's not just about him. He knows how important this is for America, and he's going to continue to fight. So he's in a fighting mode, and I'm with him. And I'm going to be with him until the wheels fall off. And I hear that everywhere I go. The people want the president to fight. He's going to fight. We're going to win. And we're going to stay focused on the American people. And we're not going to worry about history because we're trying to build a future for this country. We still have to protect the planet, create jobs, help working families. And that's what he's talking about every day. He's still campaigning while he's down, making calls. And so he's being the fighter that he's always been. And he's the fighter that we need.
Cedric Richmond from the Biden campaign, thank you. We'll be back in a moment. For a closer look now at the Republicans' shifting identity under Donald Trump and what it might mean for American democracy and the world, we are joined by Fiona Hill, a former top official on the National Security Council, and Robert Kagan is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and an editor-at-large for The Washington Post, the author of Rebellion: How Anti-Liberalism is Tearing America Apart Again. Good to have you both here. You're a former Intel analyst, Fiona, and Bob, you're a historian, Republican turned independent. So I want you to help us analyze America like it were a foreign country. Bob, here's what Donald Trump, the 45th president, Republican nominee, said last night at a rally in Michigan.
But can you imagine President Xi, Putin, all of them? They're all smart, tough. They love their country, or they want to do well with their country, whatever it is, all ideology. But we have to have somebody that can protect us. And Orban was right. We have to have somebody that can protect us.
Orban, as he said, is Orban, the Hungarian prime minister, a problematic NATO ally who's, according to Mitch McConnell, in bed with China, Russia, and Iran. What does that description of adversaries indicate to you?
Well, Trump sort of, the people that we think of as our adversaries, Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, those are the people that Trump seems to feel most warmly toward. It's our allies that he is toughest on. And it always surprises me when people say that Donald Trump is tough, because in his record, both as president, but also in the way he talks about the future, it's clear that he intends to accommodate Vladimir Putin. He just recently made very disparaging comments about Taiwan, which send a clear signal to Xi Jinping about whether we might defend Taiwan or not. And so his basic approach to the truly tough guys in the world is that he backs down, is in retreat. And his choice of J.D. Vance as his vice president sends a very strong signal about how we're going to treat allies and how we're going to treat adversaries. Vance voted not only against Ukraine aid, but against Taiwan aid and also against Israel aid. And I think that is the real foreign policy that Donald Trump speaks for now.
And Fiona, you served under Donald Trump on his Russia policy. You saw how he reacts to Vladimir Putin and authoritarians. Why should Americans take pause when they hear that? Why does it matter?
Well, there's two aspects of this. One is the one that Bob has already mentioned, which is Trump has an affinity with strongmen. It's how they project themselves on the world stage. It's how he wants to be seen himself. It's got nothing to do with the politics of China or Russia or the history and the policies around those relationships. It's more about how he sees himself reflected in those particular leaders and how they react to him. And then the second part is when it comes to allies, which Bob's already mentioned as well. Trump doesn't believe in allies, and in part that's the cutthroat nature of his own business and his business world. He sees allies really as supplicants, as people who want something from him. And he always makes it very clear he doesn't want to give anybody anything unless it's in his interest. There's a very transactional view. And so why that should give Americans pause is that's completely antithetical to the way that we've approached foreign affairs, in fact, domestic affairs, for a very long period, going back to the beginning of the Cold War. He's doing a major rupture in the way that America's positioned itself, both domestically and externally, in terms of its outward posture. I mean, as Bob often, says as well, people will figure out how to deal with this, but it doesn't make this any kind of an easier shift. This is a dramatic shift in the way that America thinks about the world.
Especially, if I may say, from Ronald Reagan, who was famous for his really close relationships with our Democratic allies, but also with allies.
Right.
He was very close to Margaret Thatcher. He was very close to Germany's Kohl, very close to France's Mitterrand, very close to Japan's Nakasone. And that was the bedrock of his foreign policy. And with those alliances and the strength that they created and the military buildup that he led, that was how we got a peaceful end to the Cold War. Whereas now with Trump and J.D. Vance, you basically have the opposite of that approach. We're negative toward our allies and supplicant toward our adversaries.
Fiona, I was out in Milwaukee, and it was very striking to see some of the imagery at the RNC. The man who introduced Donald Trump was the head of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. He walked on himself to, it's a man's world. And the walk-on going down the hallway was like he was going out to a fight. Hulk Hogan spoke. The crowd was being led in chants, fight, 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 replicating what happened with the attempted assassination. And that slogan we were showing there on the wall, they're not after me, they're after you, I'm just standing in the way. What image does all of this project to the rest of the world?
Well, it projects to the rest of the world that the United States, frankly, right now is no different from any other country where you're getting a populist leader emerging. You know, we've seen, this happening in France. We had the French had a near miss with the National Rally, a very long-standing populist, also isolationist party that nearly came to the fore in the snap elections. You've seen kind of populist parties emerging in the European Union parliamentary elections. They're on the rise in Germany. You know, we've seen Brazil, in Argentina, there's a populist leader, of slightly different bent, of course. Mexico, you can look around the world and see this same phenomenon. And, as you said, look at it as a foreign country. We would be putting the United States in that kind of, not the pantheon of the greats at the moment, but the pantheon of the populist countries. We'd be saying, well, what's the difference with Hungary? What's the difference with Bolivia? What's the difference with Brazil in, the past with Bolsonaro? We would be very hard-pressed to see what the difference is. And that's what the rest of the world is looking at. They're looking at America being taken over by populist politics and also a minority, a very vociferous, vocal minority that is pushing, particular viewpoints on what's frankly the majority of the rest of the citizens.
It's also striking to me how in all those examples you just laid out, migration issues was such a trigger point for galvanizing populist opinion.
But it plays out very differently in each country.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, here there's this whole idea, which of course is what J.D. Vance and many others have talked about in the convention, that democracy is going to end because migrants are coming in and it's going to change, somehow the whole perception of the politics. We actually have a great demand for migrant labour in the United States. Our growth has been dependent on that. All of the, basically economic data shows that. In other countries where there has been less economic growth, there's still, a downturn as a result of the economic crisis, from a decade ago or from COVID. There's more of a concern for competition for scarce resources and scarce jobs. There's not this idea of replacement of the population in the same way that there is here. Immigration is, of course, an international crisis. But there's a very different way it's manifesting itself in politics in different places.
Bob, you had an op-ed in November saying if Trump wins, he'll be the most powerful president to ever hold that office. And you warned the country's drifting towards dictatorship. In response, J.D. Vance came out with a pretty sharp letter to the Attorney General and the Secretary of State about you, saying, I suspect that they might characterize this article as an invitation to insurrection, conspiracy, attempt to bring about civil war, and he even suggested your spouse's security clearance should be reviewed. What do you think that reveals about the man seeking to be vice president?
Well, it's a preview of coming attractions. Obviously, they don't like people writing critical articles about them, but their answer to people writing critical articles about them is that they should be investigated by the Justice Department. And I think
that sounds like weaponizing the Justice System.
Well, it certainly sounds like weaponizing the Justice Department, but more than that, it sounds like the end of free speech in our country. And I think it's really important to focus on something that J.D. Vance said in his acceptance speech. He said America is not a creedal country. I think a lot of people didn't really know what he was talking about. But what he is talking about, the creed of the United States is the Declaration of Independence and the principles therein, that everyone is equal, that everyone enjoys individual rights that were granted not by God but by government, but by the nature of being human. And that is what J.D. Vance is saying we should not be. And the people that he is influenced by, the intellectuals he's influenced by, are explicit about saying the Declaration of Independence, which Abraham Lincoln said was the essence of America, should not be what America's about. What should it be about? It should be about where you were born, what your ethnic group is, and it's a very nice way of saying white Christian nationalism. And that is what J.D. Vance is talking about. And so the problem is not just immigrants, it's everybody who's not a white Christian.
Well, he would say his spouse is the daughter of immigrants, which he celebrated during his speech.
Right, but in that world, in a world where we're talking about an ethno-religious definition of America rather than a creedal ideas definition of America, sure, she can be in America, but she's not a real American. And that's something that Hulk Hogan, because the philosopher Hulk Hogan said only the people who support Trump are real Americans. And I think there's a long tradition. By the way, what Vance is offering is not new. It's old. It's the oldest game. It's been in both parties. It is hostility to the fundamental principles that the founders established at the beginning of this country, which is about human equality.
And when you say not new, you're talking about 1920s, 1930s, 1940s.
That's right, and the 19th century as well, both before the Civil War and after the Civil War, when many white Americans did not want to see blacks and other minorities and immigrants have equal rights.
Thank you for your analysis, both of you. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.